Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted Tuesdays in the off-season, twice during the regular season. The huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We start off with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this special edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, and then give you the latest USC Trojans football news. First, let's meet Tuesday's panelists, a WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways. In addition to regular season football and basketball reports, he also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC, Marc Kulkin. The editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC, Erik McKinney, a former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge and his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, and he is a graduate of the USC Law School, Chris Arledge. And finally, a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays the Obvious and Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America, your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's a recap in USC's football news. On Monday, the Trojans received a commitment from class of 2024 four-star receiver Xavier Jordan, 6 feet 160, from Chatsworth, California, Sierra Canyon High. Jordan is ranked number 72 in the country by On3 and has been compared to former USC wide receiver Jordan Addison. Jordan's commitment places the Trojans in the On3 top 25 for the class of 2024. And speaking of Jordan Addison, last week the NFL had its annual draft, and 4 Trojans heard their name called at draft headquarters in Kansas City. USC wide receiver Jordan Addison was selected in the first round as the number 23 selection by the Minnesota Vikings. Defensive lineman Tuli Puipolotu was taken in the second round by the hometown Chargers. More on all the Trojans in the draft and the Trojans signed as free agents coming up later in the huddle. Sunday was the last day of the portal transfer window, number 2. Last week in commitment news, Wyoming portal transfer Emmanuel Pregnon, 6'6", 318, confirmed through his social media that he would be coming to play at USC in 2023. Pregnon, originally from Denver, Colorado, has 3 years of eligibility remaining and figures to be a lead candidate for one of Troy's offensive guard positions. And this one final note, the Trojans are down a defensive lineman, as last week seldom used Earl Barquett, who transferred from TCU in 2022, entered the transfer portal. Friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership. We encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click on the red subscriber button and like button. It's greatly valued and it is free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering a subscription special. You can get all the WeAreSC premium content for just $29.99 up to August 31st, 2023, or $9.99 per month. These offers include all the off-season recruiting and transfer news, plus it takes you through training camp right through the Trojans' first game against San Jose State on August 26th in the Coliseum. All right, first half, we're underway. Here's the kickoff. Panel, as mentioned, the Trojans received another big commitment last week from Wyoming offensive line portal transfer Emmanuel Pregnon. In the current transfer portal rankings, the Trojans ranked number 2 behind number 1 Colorado. Sunday, as we mentioned, was the last day for the NCAA transfer portal window second cycle. How would you rate the second portal window cycle? How do you rate the 2 portal windows combined in your opinion? Did it fill up all the needs? If not, where do you see more help needed? We kick off, as always, with Marc Kulkin. Give us your assessment.
So combined, I give the portal class, I'm giving it an A+. Now, it's weighted towards the first window that closed, just because of the numbers, and they filled so many needs, specifically on the defensive line. But this second window so far, it's not done. So I guess we could call it incomplete, but right now it's an A. You know, they went out, they got Bear Alexander, which probably, you know, if I'm grading a little bit too harsh, I'm Mr. Negativity on this show, apparently.
What gave you that impression, Mark?
Yeah, I don't know. And then you bring in Emmanuel Pregnon. That's a great start for the second portal window. Now, I would love for them to bring in one more defensive lineman, and I still think they need to bring in somebody who is a dedicated offensive tackle. Other than that, I think Lincoln Riley and his staff have done a outstanding job using the transfer portal. They're two behind Colorado because Colorado decided just to empty their bench and put 53 players out there and have to go refill their bench. So,
Mark, since you mentioned it, do you foresee the Trojans bringing in another offensive tackle, defensive tackle within the near future?
Lincoln Riley said they're not done yet. And, you know, initially everyone thought Cameron Johnson was going to be the offensive lineman that SC was going to get. He hasn't made his commitment yet. Again, he's falling into that Coach Primetime trap. I think he's making that visit to Boulder. Everyone kind of assumed it was between USC and Missouri. I guess we'll find out.
We will find out. Chris, what'd you think?
I mean, I think that if you combine the two transfer portals together, you're talking about an unbelievable haul. USC had giant holes in the front seven, and they pulled in what, probably 6 guys who are going to make a real difference up front, including 2 guys that have first round talent, 2 guys that have played a lot of football and are capable of stepping in and playing with their hands down and playing very well. A middle linebacker who I think is going to be athletic and a tackle machine, some edge guys who may be able to fill that hole. I mean, would I like to have seen them pull in an All-American edge rusher? Yeah. But I don't think there are a lot of All-American edge rushers in the portal. And so, you know, it is what it is. Everybody would like to get an All-American edge rusher out of the portal. No, it was a fantastic job of building USC where they need to be built, rebuilding the offensive line, building up the front seven. You say, is more help needed? Well, what football team doesn't have some holes in the roster? I mean, quite literally, Nick Saban's probably looking at his roster saying, I wish we were a little better here. I wish we were a little better there. And in fact, the position he's most likely saying that about is the most important position on the field, which USC doesn't have to worry about. But does USC have to have more help? I don't know. To do what? To beat Georgia on a neutral field? Maybe. But USC has a top 5 roster in college football right now.
Yeah. Wow.
You have a top 5 roster. They got the best offense in the country, and they now have a defensive backfield that looks pretty deep with talent, maybe not proven talent. They have at least 2 linebackers who I think, if they're healthy and playing, are going to make plays all over the field, and a freshman who I think is going to be there pretty quickly. And they have now a bunch more experienced big bodies, returners that are better, guys that have played in other places. 2 guys in Lucas and Bear who, if they turn out to be what everybody thinks they're going to be, are potential first-round draft choices on the defensive line. That's a top 5 roster. That's better than Oregon. It's better than Utah. It's better than Washington. It's better than anybody else in the Pac-12. It's not better than Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, but it's better than everybody else. And they have the best player at the most important position. I don't know, guys. That's a tough schedule, but with that roster, you're going to be favored, or should be favored, to win every game. And you have a legitimate chance to make the playoff.
Erik, you are the editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com. You know recruiting like the back of your hand. You agree with what Mr. Arledge is saying? What's your overall assessment with these portal windows?
It was good again. I mean, Lincoln Riley, they went out last offseason and just were kind of it was the last 10 seconds of a supermarket sweep run where it was take this, and try to throw everything in the cart and go. This one, and you had so many holes to fill that it almost didn't matter what position you were targeting, because you probably needed a guy at every spot as you were building that roster. They found a way in this window. So looking back at it, there were about 13 starters that they added last offseason that started significant chunks of the 2022 season. 13 guys in this transfer portal class. I have a hard time finding a guy who hasn't already established himself as a starter or looks like a very potential starter. Now you've got, 5 guys that could play up on the defensive line. And so you're not going to end up with all of those guys starting every game just because the numbers don't work out. But those are all potential starters and guys who could see a ton of time. And so in this one, they really were able to be very direct. We need to go get a guy to play this spot. And they went out and got a pretty good guy at all of those spots. And obviously they did, like Marc said, they did most of their damage in that first window, which I think is always better to do because you get those guys in spring and you get the off season, the winter conditioning, the spring, the summer, all of it. So you can get them into the program a little bit. And then you can be even sort of more specific after your spring ball. And that's where it's, hey, we need a big time defensive lineman. We need an offensive lineman with starting experience that we can plug into this specific spot. And so you're able to do that. And yeah, I think there's still a couple spots, maybe a guy who can play in the secondary safety or nickel to kind of give you a little bit more depth there. But I don't think at any spot are you going, holy cow, we've got nothing there. And I think you're good with kind of your front line across it. If you wanted to add kind of a younger guy, a first year or second year player, someone like that to kind of add depth throughout as you go, I think you do that if you have a talented guy. But it sure doesn't feel like there's kind of a scramble drill right now of we got to get a guy at this spot or we're not going to be able to field a 2 deep. So no, in 2 years, 2 off seasons, I guess, Lincoln Riley and this staff have done a great job in filling holes, building depth. I think Chris mentioned if you could have a guy who was a top 10, top 5 pick at edge rusher and do that, but maybe that's Anthony Lucas and he's more of that edge guy than a hand in the dirt defensive lineman. But no, I think you can go with this as is. And that's absolutely the case where the transfer portal is now. You always have kind of 10-15% of your attention. Hey, who's still in there? Who maybe can we go get? Because if you stop paying attention to it, you're missing out on making your roster better. If you ever think, no, we're totally set, we don't need anybody else. But at this point, they're in a great spot.
Yeah, I agree with you. They are in a great spot. I would give them an A. It's the total numbers with the 2 cycles combined. I would like to see them pick up one more defensive lineman, one more offensive lineman. But when ESPN had a story that ran today of the top, I think it was 15 or 20 rankings of transfer portals, and SC had the top 2 players. One was Bear Alexander, a defensive lineman, of course. And the other one was Pregnon, the offensive lineman. And I'd say when you're getting the top 2 in those type of rankings, you're doing pretty good. And it's very easy to see that they are going to be slotted in. So, I'm just kind of curious to see how going forward here, how Lincoln Riley, if he adds more credibility now or more interest in the transfer portal. I don't know if interest is the proper word, but they're doing so well and there's so many positives. The first thing I look at a transfer is how many years of eligibility does he have? You can start getting guys with 3 years of eligibility that are considered really major players in your program. Well, it doesn't get much better than that, in my opinion. All right, let's move on to talk about the full USC and the NFL draft in the second half of the huddle. We're going to talk about that, but your thoughts on the fact that 2 of the top 3 USC draft selections were one-year transfer portal guys, and we're talking about wide receiver Jordan Addison and defensive back Mekhi Blackman. Both went to the Vikings. What are your thoughts and what message is being sent out to potential transfer players in the future coming to USC based on the Addison and Blackman one and done as transfers? What do you think, Mark?
I think USC is becoming Minnesota's pipeline. Look, it's obvious they like the fact that Jordan and Mekhi went up against each other during practice as often as possible. I'm sure they saw that film. But, what the message it's sending to transfers is, hey, you're probably good where you were, but if you want to come to LA and play for USC, you're going to get a lot more exposure. You're going to get coached up, and you're going to be selected higher in the draft than maybe you thought you might not have been in the past. Mekhi Blackman, everyone thought this guy was going to be what, 4th, 5th, 6th round guy, jumped up into the 3rd round. Everyone knew Jordan was going to be a 1st round pick. Had he not gotten hurt last year, he probably slots, maybe a couple slots higher. His numbers would have been better. But look, this transfer portal thing is it's new. So there's not a whole big, sample size to work with, but it's working for USC right now. 2 guys came over, and when you're picked in the top 150 players, you're probably going to be playing in the league for a while. They think you're pretty good. So I'm assuming other transfers who are considering USC are going to say, hey, how bad can it be playing in LA for a year? NIL, playing for Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams, maybe even a national championship coming up, future championships. I think it's going to resonate. It's not going to hurt.
Chris, this is a really kind of an interesting thing when you get Addison and Blackman, one-year guys, and they're in the league. If you're a player looking to transfer, how big is an advantage is it for USC to show other transfers? I think one of the things I think you would agree with me on this is during the other guys' era here at Troy, we'll just say the name, Clay Helton. The question was always development of players. If you're a player that's a transfer, what's the big message that you see being sent to you?
Well, I'll deal with the Clay Helton issue first. I mean, if you look at this draft, you had 2 guys that Clay Helton recruited that got drafted, and one of those guys had his draft stock go up pretty significantly because Sean Newa's help over the last couple of years. So we already knew that Clay's recruiting had dramatically fallen off from where USC should be, and his development had, and you're just seeing that. You have 4 guys get drafted. 2 of them were one-year rentals because we didn't have anybody who could do what those guys could do. But enough on Clay Helton. Although, if you want more about Clay Helton, I put part 1 of my history of recent USC football up. We don't get to Clay yet. That'll be next week. But go read that. Maybe you'll like it. Maybe you'll hate it. I don't know. It brings back a lot of bad memories, to be honest. I don't know that Jordan Addison's time at USC means a whole lot to recruits, other than that it's probably cool that a guy who was already a Blitnikoff winner thought that USC was a nice place to land. But USC didn't get Jordan Addison into the 1st round of the NFL draft. Jordan Addison was already a guy who was NFL scouts already knew who he was. But I think Blackman getting into the 3rd round is a nice feather in Dante Williams' cap. And here's the thing. A lot of people, I'm one of them, have been somewhat critical of Dante over the last few years as a guy who's a fantastic recruiter, but you hadn't been seeing the development from these players that you would have wanted to. And I've been critical of him, but this is an example of him taking a guy who was not a top 3 draft choice. He comes to USC, he plays extraordinarily well, and he sneaks into the top 3. So Dante has something to talk about, and USC has something to talk about to defensive backs. So I think that's nice when you're talking about potential transfers or even freshman recruits in the future.
Eric, how do you view that? And do you think that Dante Williams has through the transfer portal taken some of the heat off of himself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much heat there was. He was the one holdover that Lincoln Riley kept. That certainly says something about what Lincoln Riley believes about him. But no, Chris is right. Mekhi Blackmon is the guy to look at in that draft. And what USC was able to do for him is exactly what all of these transfers want. I mean, he jumped, I don't know, 3-4 rounds in the draft by coming to USC. And maybe he would have played that well at Colorado, but Colorado was so bad this last year that it would have been tough to kind of develop that sort of shine, I think, for a defense. I know we're talking about bad defenses at Colorado and not at USC, but Mekhi Blackmon came to USC, played really well, got in the spotlight a little bit for a good team, and saw that pay off in the draft. And that's what USC is going to try to sell to a lot of these transfers. So to do it in year one with Lincoln Riley bringing in all these guys, that's big. Jordan Addison, yes, he was a first rounder, but he didn't fall out of the first round and come into USC, which again, you want to check that box. If a big time guy is making the move to your program, you can't let him down. You can't let him drop out of the first round and become a second, third round pick and not, prove that he's that guy. So that's big too. The Voorhees thing is tough. I mean, that's just the absolute worst timing for an injury. I think the fact that he still got drafted says a lot about what people believe his ability to be. And then Tuli going in the second round, that tweener label that can get stuck on guys can hurt you in the draft. And so for him to still stick there in the second round and not see a significant fall, I think was good. Again, good for him, good for USC, good for Sean Nua to be able to kind of show people, hey, there's a second round pick coming out of this defense. So yeah, ultimately, I think the Mekhi Blackmon story is the one you feature from this in what USC was able to do and what he was able to do, right? That story that he has coming out of high school, not having anywhere to land, going to a junior college, playing his way up. I mean, just up the ladder, rung by rung by rung, until he's a third round pick, which is really an achievement. We get into a situation with recruiting and the draft, right? If you're not a first round pick, if you're not a 5-star, that's somebody telling you you're terrible. To be drafted at all, to be ranked in the top, 400 in the country as a recruit, like that you've proven something already. And so I think just kind of off topic there with Mekhi, like absolute congratulations to him on what he's been able to do with his football career so far.
Yeah, we'll talk about the draft in the second half. I want to just kind of wrap this particular question up by saying so much positive energy that's being out there going to players both in high school and in the transfer portal. And let's not forget that a lot of players that SC might be recruiting in high school that don't go to USC are going to have in their mind, if you go to SC as a transfer, I'll get developed and I can still make it to the league. And that may be the best. Right now, a lot of positive vibes coming out. I think it's really a real advantage at this point in time. Panel, is there a player out there still at his original college that you actually expected to see jump into the portal and for the Trojans to pursue? Mark, was there somebody that you thought was going to jump into the portal or hoped would jump into the portal from the opposition that SC might scoop up?
And I was looking at this strictly from an name, image, likeness standpoint, and kind of also to troll Ohio State because USC will be joining that conference. Marvin Harrison, that's the type of thing where an agent says, hey, Marvin, you're going to be a major star in the NFL, but let's capitalize on you and Caleb Williams playing together for 1 year in LA. I know there was some stuff floating around that it might possibly happen. I was kind of hoping that would, because that would be one of those data points where all of a sudden you're saying, this is how USC is going to be a major power player with the transfer portal, with elite talent who wants to come get paid for a year and just get the maximum exposure. So just from that aspect, there really wasn't anybody out there that I cared about. But just I think that would have been really unique had that happened. You know, you had Jordan Addison last year. In my opinion, you're stepping up when you go to a Marvin Harrison Jr. because there's people actually considering taking him #1 overall. Now, I've only heard Joel Klatt say that, but we understand why he doesn't like Caleb Williams or USC.
Why do you say that? I'm curious. You don't like USC?
He took a beating when he was playing at Colorado, and I think he saw what happened last year.
Wow. All right. Chris, you see anybody that you hope would go into the portal and SC would gobble up?
Not really. I mean, I have no idea who's thinking about going. I read the same rumors everybody else does, but I never know where those come from. And even if they come from the player or the people around the player, you don't know why. It could just be that rumors they're going to jump in the portal and go to USC helps raise NIL dollars at home. So no, there was nobody that I was expecting to jump in that did. For that matter, there's nobody that jumped in that I was expecting, other than USC players who I figured probably would need to go. But other guys, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I'll be honest, Emmanuel Pregnon is a name I had not heard until about a week and a half ago. So while I'm excited to hear him, it's not like I'm so up on all the rosters of the other 120 something schools that I'm scouring them for guys who probably aren't being developed as well, who may jump into the portal. We probably have people at USC doing that work, but nobody's paying me to do it.
Erik?
Before that, just Mark, clarification, and not that Joel Klatt needs defending, but his list was Marvin Harrison as the #1 player in college football, and we can debate that. But he acknowledged Caleb Williams is the top draft pick. He's the #1 pick next spring. So no, right? Like I don't know what their situation is. I don't know what other players on other programs are angling to make with NIL or what their everyone's depth chart looks like. In terms of guys who jumped in that I would have liked to see USC either make a run at or finish off the recruitment of, I think it's the defensive linemen, the edge guys, right? Josiah Stewart came in from Coastal Carolina and wound up at Michigan, and Deshaun McCullough went in from Indiana, ended up at Oklahoma, and then Braden Fisk, I think, went from, where was he? Western Michigan. I think he ended up at Florida State. So those were a couple guys, again, up front. If you look at who USC got, I don't know if there's anyone where you'd go, oh, I'd trade him for him. But when they came into the portal and USC showed some level of interest, when they went elsewhere, I remember thinking, oh, that would have been kind of a nice addition. But trying to guess who's going to go in, who's not going to go in, it just, I mean, I can't imagine being a college football coach where which rumor is true, what are you hearing kind of in the locker room of guys possibly going in. I know the Wyoming head coach Craig Bohl had talked about, like, the Emmanuel Pregnon thing had been kind of weeks in the making of, is he going to go? What am I hearing? Or, how's this going to work? I just can't imagine trying to keep up with all of that on your roster and everybody else's roster.
Yeah, boy, I tell you, it's always tough to be a college football coach when you consider before the transfer portal. You never really know what's going on in the locker room. You hope that your captains will get it straightened out. You'll be informed. But one player that I thought might jump in the portal, I was hoping he would jump in the portal, was David Bailey from Stanford. I thought that there was a real opportunity. Of course, we know that Bailey is very strong on the academic part of his life. But I thought, the Trojans gave a real run at him. And I thought, well, with this change in coaching at Stanford, maybe that would have him reassess it. But, I thought that Lincoln Riley made a really great point recently when he said, USC isn't for everyone because there is so much tension. It's hard to, if you're from an outsider's point of view, to understand how big USC is in a city of champions at the professional level. The Rams winning the Super Bowl, the Dodgers always in the play. I mean, it's one superstar after another. The names. And some players, I think, don't want to be in that. I think Lincoln Riley may have mentioned the word fishbowl. I too thought that Marvin Harrison Jr. would have been a wonderful addition for all the reasons that are said. But I think what Erik said, this idea of would I trade him for him, I think the Trojans are very happy with what they got. Now, panel, in a recent WeAreSC premium interview with Lincoln Riley by our Scott Schrader, which was part of our premium content, Lincoln Riley went into somewhat in depth of the many different approaches and different strategies that he and his entire recruiting staff have for national and local players. Again, Riley said his program will hold another similar extravaganza coming up like last June, when over 20 big-time players had a massive Hawaiian luau party at the coach's luxurious home in Palos Verdes estate, which overlooks the Pacific Ocean. Regarding last year's recruiting events at his home, Riley told Scott Schrader, "It was really a cool experience with a big group. We love seeing people get out here and loving what we're doing and momentum behind it. And this year, we're not just selling a vision for the program. Now guys have seen the results on the field, seen all the momentum. It's a little bit more real." Excuse me. Panel, what recruiting strategies by Riley and his recruiting staff have you found to be the most interesting, impressive, and or effective with both transfer portal and high school prospects? Marc, I know you follow recruiting religiously. What is the most impressive thing, or some of the most impressive things about the way Lincoln Riley goes about his recruiting of transfer and high school players?
I like how he does everything. I don't know. It's kind of, it flies under the radar, kind of. You think you know what's going on, but you really don't. Obviously, his recruiting strategy is working. He's got the system in place with Annie Hansen. I don't think cost is a factor from what we've heard behind the scenes. Those June bashes, it's not just one they have. They usually, last year they had two. The big one, obviously, they had 14, 15 commitments out of the, 20 or 25 guys who showed up at the second one. So it works. Sometimes you don't need to recreate the wheel. So just continue doing what he's doing. I know it seems like he and the staff are all over the place nationally, and people wonder, well, are you shirking the local high schools? They're not. They have a method that they're approaching with. It's character over talent. And I think people need to realize that while everyone wants the 5-star, they're looking for the right locker room culture. It has to be the right fit. So there's nothing to complain about with recruiting right now. I know people would like to see more defensive linemen, offensive linemen early, I guess, but it's not how you start, it's how you finish. So as far as his recruiting, I have very little to complain about.
Someone write that down? Marc has very little to complain about. Chris, now I don't think you're going to complain, but what do you?
Complainer, Greg.
No, you certainly aren't. No question about that.
Yeah.
Chris, what impresses you about the way Lincoln Riley is recruiting and how he does maybe something a little different with transfers or high school players? What's your assessment?
Can I first say that you focused on the last part of Marc's answer? I want to focus on the first part, where he said nobody really knows what's going on. I think it's brave of Marc to admit that he has no idea what's going on with recruiting, especially just seconds after you talked about how he follows it religiously and you introduced him as a recruiting expert. That's brave.
That's how you took that one.
That's brave. Okay, so I think what's been most impressive about what Riley's done with recruiting is how he has seamlessly transitioned into this NIL realm, which is brand new, and done it in a way that I didn't expect. What I expected was that Lincoln Riley would demand that he get cash to pay players the way Oregon and Miami and others do. But that hasn't been his take. He's decided, I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is go and fill holes in my roster with transfers who I know can step in, who are proven guys who can play. And when you think about it, I mean, you would expect that over time, USC will have 80% of its starters, 80% of its two deep filled with guys they recruited right out of high school, right? But what it means, I think, is that Riley can look at a guy and say, you know what, if Oregon's going to give that guy a bag of cash to sign with them, I'll wait. He's probably not going to play this year anyway. And I'll go find somebody in the transfer portal who's already established themselves as a major college football player, and I'll plug him into that spot on the roster. I think it's an interesting way to handle it, and I think a successful way to navigate this. So that's what's been most impressive to me. Yeah, that's all I've got to say.
All right, Erik, what have you got to say about it? What really strikes you?
Lincoln Riley is involved with every kid that he wants. He is like the lead recruiter of anyone that kid talks to, from the USC staff and from any staff. I think. I mean, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but Lincoln Riley is as involved in recruiting each kid that his kind of top targets in the class as any head coach in college football. And that absolutely stands out when you hear what the recruits are saying about kind of their connection with him. And it stands out looking at kind of previous success stories with USC recruiting, and also when they couldn't get some of those guys. And then how organized it is. There's always this, we see people on the message board and fans constantly worried. If you bring in 20 official visitors, how can you possibly spend time with all of them? Aren't they going to feel like they didn't get time with anybody? If you have an unofficial visit weekend with 200 kids on campus, how are they possibly going to feel like they got any sort of special attention? They do it. You talk to some of these kids that come out of these weekends, and it's like, did you get any time with your position coach, O'Reilly? Yeah, absolutely. Got time with him in his office, got to sit down, got to talk to the position coach. And so the organization it takes, and Marc mentioned Annie Hansen as kind of one of the leaders in that regard, the organization it takes and the attention to detail it takes to pull off some of these weekends that they're doing, it's incredible. And the effects of being able to get big weekends early in the recruiting calendar, and those guys to come back, either repeat unofficial visits or for official visits, it's pretty remarkable how they can bring a guy out for an unofficial visit and it makes such an impact that they'll come out for another unofficial visit. And these are trips. I mean, coming out from Texas, coming out from the Southeast, from back East, they want to be around USC because of kind of the environment that they're able to create on some of these weekends. And that's big. You always had the, oh, well, he's just coming out to take an official visit to Los Angeles, which I'm sure still happens, but you're seeing more, no, there's real interest in the program and what some of these recruits feel like they can learn about college football and about college in general when they take these trips right now. So it's a really good sort of breadth and depth experience for a lot of the recruits coming out, where they can get a lot out of these visits, even if they're there with a big crew.
Yeah, I have to say that I think the best recruiter I have seen prior to Lincoln Riley at USC, and this goes back to the John McKay era, was Pete Carroll. He was like, I think Ed Ogeron once said, when you recruit with Pete, that when he comes in to close the deal, it's a done deal. And he says, even when he was went his own way to be a head coach, he said, you don't want to get into a recruiting struggle with Pete Carroll because you're going to lose most of the time. I think the thing about Lincoln Riley, like Pete Carroll, is when you are around him, you feel like, and this goes to your point, Erik, you feel like he really knows you, that you have a comfort zone with him, like Pete Carroll. Very few people can really do that. Some coaches have an edge to them. Saban has an edge to him, but he's such a incredibly successful coach that he was kind of like John McKay, in that you just walk into his office and you're like, okay, It's not what he really tries to sell you on. It's just his aura, his persona. But I think that the overall structure of recruiting in today's recruiting world by Lincoln Riley and his understanding of Los Angeles, I know he talked with Pete Carroll about it, but I think he's on the verge, if they really have a big season again this season and they accomplish what they couldn't finish at the end, really on the verge of taking USC's recruiting to a level that's going to make it very difficult, even when SC is in the Big Ten. He gets kids to come out to LA, and we've all seen what he does, come up to my home, we'll overlook the ocean. Is like, boy, I could get into this. And I think not enough attention has been given to people such, I think the name Annie Hansen was brought up, just what an impact she and her staff have done. I'm going to make a shameless plug here, but Chris, if you could get Annie Hansen on your show to talk about SC in their recruiting, I think it would be fascinating. So just a little seed planted there. We're going to move on here to halftime because we do have a tight show here and we want to keep it moving. The college football playoffs, better known as CFP, today, which is Tuesday, announced the official game dates and bowl assignments for the 2024-25 college football seasons. The new dates are the next step in the transition to a 12-team playoff set to begin in 2024, as most of you know. We're going to concentrate here on the schedule of the 2024 season, but for those of you that did not know this as an official, because it just came out, here's the way the playoff is going to work. And certainly fantasize a little bit about if SC actually gets in the playoffs, which we're all rooting for, of course. The first round is going to be on campus. You knew that, but it's going to be one game is going to be on Friday, December 20th, 2024. That one game will be an evening game. It'll be followed by Saturday, December 21st. 3 games, one in the early afternoon, late afternoon, and evening. Again, those are 3 games. All 4 combined are going to be on campus. So, it's possible SC could be hosting a game in the Collie come that time. Moving to the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals will take place Tuesday, December 31st. That will be the Arbo Fiesta Bowl. That'll be played in the evening. And then Wednesday on January 1st, it'll be a kind of a traditional Chick-fil-A. Peach Bowl will be in the early afternoon. Rose Bowl will be late afternoon. All-State Sugar Bowl will be in the evening. Moving along to the semifinals, and this is where we start to extend the playoffs. Thursday, January 9th, 2025, the Capital One Orange Bowl will be an evening game. And then the second semifinal will be on a Friday, January 10th, 2025. That will be the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic, which will be also held in the evening. The CFP National Championship game will be on Monday, January 20th, 2025, in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, which is also, by the way, Atlanta is the home of the College Football Hall of Fame. The exact kickoff times for each of these games, of course, will be announced later. And just as a brief reminder, the field of 25 will be comprised of 6 conference champions, ranked highest by the selection committee, no minimum ranking requirement, plus the 6 highest ranked other teams. Again, it'll be done by committee, but I know that was a lot of information, but it's certainly important information that you can chew on. Panel, your overall thoughts on this new official college football playoff information. We'll start off with Erik. What do you make of all of it? Do you like it? What don't you like about it? Did they do it the right way? It is official. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, we're going to figure it out. We watched, talking about, I think a lot of the conversation will be you're playing college football games during the middle of the week, a big game on a Wednesday and a Thursday. We watch college basketball championship game on a Monday. I mean, it's kind of just how things work with TV now. And when you're playing that many games now in the playoffs, right at the same time as the NFL going, you're always going to be up against it in terms of TV. I mean, you look at the most watch, telecasts of the year, and what is it, like the top 50 or NFL games or something? I mean, that's that's king. And so you're always going to run up against it when you do that. So you do what you can to shift. I know a lot of people are really excited about, I think it's the semifinals that go Thursday, Friday, right into NFL playoffs, Saturday, Sunday. And so you get like a big run of it. When you're talking about kind of the lead up to it, it's tough to find where that fits. What are these big shows going to be talking about? Are they talking about the NFL playoffs? Are they talking about college football playoffs? So all of that being said, I'm excited to see what it looks like. I mean, I don't have to be bothered with what the TV ratings are and what, ad revenues being made or anything like that. I like that those early games are held on a campus. I think you absolutely deserve, if you're one of those teams, to be able to host a game. And I think the atmospheres at those places are going to be incredible. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, yeah, I mean, where are you going to put those other games? You got to play somewhere. And so, yeah, you're going to go up against, I think, some NFL in some of the early rounds. But look, we've already become accustomed to watching the biggest college football games in the middle of the week anyway. And if you're coming from the Pac-12, you're used to watching games in the middle of the week for years now. So it's kind of
not watching them.
Or not be the fact that there's going to be Friday night games on that you can actually watch, I think is big news for USC fans and Pac-12 fans. Yes.
Mark, you like it?
I just hope that the playoffs don't take as long as your intro talking about the playoffs thing, but I'm fine with it. How they have it set up. Home field advantage for the best teams. Use the existing bowl facilities for quarterfinals, semifinals. That's great. As far as I like the fact that they're going to be doubling up with the NFL. I think that's going to increase, believe it or not, increase viewership, because NFL is still the #1 most viewed sport in this country, and college football isn't that far behind it. So I can actually see this turning into, oh, by the way, your first playoff game is going to be USC versus Ohio State, followed thereafter by the Rams versus the Dallas Cowboys. I think eventually that's what you're going to see. It's just, you're going to have a complete marriage, but the direction, they have to start somewhere. Let's see where it goes from there. I think Erik did a great job covering it. There's really not a whole lot more to add.
Well, I know, Chris, you must have a lot more to add. Do you like it,
What
Chris?
does that mean? What do you mean by that? You're chippy like Mark is. Mark got chippy.
Oh, no, don't put me in the same.
No, but you heard him. He was criticizing your question, which was about 12 minutes long.
Mark would criticize.
So you agree with me, Chris?
Of course it was long, but I wasn't going to say anything.
Mark would criticize New Year's Eve.
Yeah, your intro took as long as a first quarter takes.
All right. You guys are fighting. I'm gonna try to get us back to football. Here's what jumps out at me about this. When you think about what the 2024 season should look like for USC, it's going to be much easier to make the playoff, right? I mean, you can get in with 2 losses, maybe if you're the right team and have the right schedule, maybe even with 3. So USC is going to open with LSU. They're going to play Notre Dame. They're going to have UCLA, and you can be sure that the networks are going to want a USC, Ohio State, or Michigan, or Penn State, at least one of those, maybe 2. And then if USC makes the playoff, you're talking about these playoff games against highly rated teams. I mean, we've had seasons where you have maybe a couple of big weekends, but I mean, I'm looking at 2024 and I'm saying, shoot, USC is going to have like 5 or 6 massive games. Which is going to be just an unbelievable amount of fun. And look, when you're talking about even that first round, when you're talking about what it's going to be 5 against 12 and 6 against 11. You show me a lineup where over the course of a weekend, I get to watch a bunch of games where you have number 5, number 6, number 7, and number 8 hosting highly ranked teams at their stadium. That's an unbelievable weekend of college football. I mean, this is going to be so huge in cultural impact, money. I mean, everybody loves March Madness, and nobody watches regular season college basketball. The seasons, nobody even knows who these kids are because the good ones only stick around for a year. College football is already wildly more popular. Once you go down this path, the cultural impact it's going to have is going to be unbelievable. And I don't think they'll catch the NFL, but they're going to gain on the NFL, and they're going to clearly separate college football as a number 2 sport in America. And I don't think number 3 will be close anymore. So it's pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a big winner. I think to start off the opening round on a college campus, so much of college football is tradition, excitement, motivation. You're going to feel it at home if you're watching it on TV. And, the thing about like the NCAA men's basketball tournament, nobody complains about Thursday through Sunday watching games. And I think the way they split it up, there's going to be that intrigue. I think the big difference is going to be you'll have the entire nation watching it because you're going to have teams from the West Coast to the East Coast and so on and so forth, which I think they've been missing in the last several years. Even if it was a weak Pac-12 team, you'd still want to get that particular region in it. Obviously, that's going to all change, but I wish it was this coming season, honestly, especially with Caleb Williams, probably his last season. But it's certainly going to be worth the wait. And kudos to the college football for moving it up to 2024. I think it's going to be an absolute mind blower.
Just the last thing, the thing that I think I've undervalued is when you talk about the 12 teams that are in there, that path to winning is, especially if you have one of those early games, is going to be crazy. Like I've seen, look back and, people have mocked up like what the playoff bracket would have looked like this last year. USC was going to have to go Alabama, probably Michigan, probably Clemson, probably Georgia. Like they had to win those games against those teams in that order. Whoever wins this might be the most well-earned trophy in sports at this point in terms of getting big time team after big time team. Like you can win a basketball national championship because you kind of got an easier path, especially earlier on. And if you get a Final Four team that is an 8 or a 7 or something like that, I don't know if you're going to see a 12 sneak in there. Like you're going to have to beat at least 3 very good to great teams. And it's going to be something else, I think, when you actually see this thing play out.
Indeed. All right, let's move on to the second half kickoff here by taking a look back at the just concluded NFL draft held in Kansas City. Panel 4 Trojans, of course, were selected in the 7 rounds. As just a quick review, round 1, 23rd pick, wide receiver Jordan Addison, selected by the Vikings. Round 2, 54th pick, defensive lineman Tuli Tuipulotu, selected by the Chargers. Round 3, 102nd pick, cornerback Mekhi Blackman, selected by the Vikings. And in round 7, 2029 pick, offensive lineman Andrew Voorhees, selected by the Baltimore Ravens. Panel, was there anything about the Trojans in the draft that were selected that excited you, disappointed you, or surprised you, Chris?
Well, I mean, the 4 guys that got drafted were the 4 guys that I think we all thought probably would. Tuli and Blackman went maybe a little bit higher than I feared they might, which was nice to see. Voorhees went a little bit lower than I would have hoped, but the truth is he's a guard, and guards don't get picked as high as tackles, and he's a guard with a blown out ACL. So getting picked at all actually is quite an accomplishment. So no, I think it played out sort of how I expected it to play out, and I think it's really nice, especially for Tuli and Blackman, who moved up a little higher than a lot of people expected, which means a little bit more money, and probably means an easier path to making a roster. Not that I think either one of those guys were likely to get cut anyway, but no, it played out as I expected, and it was a good day to be a Trojan fan.
Erik, anything, what'd you find exciting, disappointing, surprise?
I mean, I went into the Mekhi Blackmon stuff. I was really excited for him, and Tuli getting to stay local in Los Angeles. I think that's always kind of a fun story. The Addison thing was, I guess if you're looking, I mean, the Voorhees thing was a disappointment, but that was a disappointment months ago when he got hurt, because you knew what that would do to his stock. But Addison maybe going fourth in that run of receivers, but I do think that, you know, playing next to Justin Jefferson, that's not a bad spot for him to land. So if you're disappointed that he wasn't, you know, the number one receiver or number two, they all got bunched together, and he certainly ended up in a spot where you're not all that disappointed for him in terms of what he might be able to do early on. So yeah, it's not, you weren't expecting 9 guys to get drafted and only 3 of them got picked or anything. I mean, the guys who went were the guys you expected to go. And ultimately, I think landed in a lot of really good situations. The Vikings absolutely need guys who can play in that defensive backfield. And Mekhi Blackmon's going to get a ton of chances, especially because when you're a 3rd round pick compared to a 6th round pick, they're going to keep wanting to put you out there and see what you can do. And then Voorhees is kind of a stash pick that Baltimore is always going to run the ball well. It's well-run organization. You've got, you know, that quarterback behind you now who can make up for some misses and all that. So again, good spots for all those guys.
Mark?
Yeah, no, look, Tuli, he not only does he get to stay home, but he gets to learn from a couple of really good players in front of him, Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack. That's a great spot for him to go. What surprised me was Brandon Peely. He's an undrafted free agent, but if it's true what his agent's saying, he's getting a $100,000 signing bonus. Miami did not draft any defensive line players. That's telling me they have a plan for Brandon, and he's probably going to make that roster, because you typically don't give 6-figure signing bonuses to undrafted free agents. As far as Voorhees is concerned, what he did on one leg when it was time to do the bench press, that alone should have bumped him up at least 1 to 2 rounds. You knew he was going to get a redshirt year in 2023 because of what happened, but put in his film. The guy can play left tackle, left guard, right tackle. He's a pretty versatile player. I wouldn't put it past him to play center. So to me, that was the really disappointing part. And that's why I'm not a big fan of the NFL Combine. He didn't have anything to prove there. What he ended up doing was proving that, hey, I'm hurt, but I'm going to fight through it. He could have done that at USC's Pro Day. But as far as surprises, no, I think everybody, it landed in the round they anticipated. We brought up Mekhi Blackmon, 4th round, 3rd round. The 4th round, I think, was the high point for him going into the draft. So he moved up a round, but he earned it. And other than that, the draft is fine.
Well, I was excited for Blackmon to see him move. I was kind of like saying, when are they coming? When are they going to take him? But my real focus, actually, and I had texted Eric on draft day, on the final day, I'm going, oh man, I'm really concerned about Voorhees. And then, you know, sometimes out of a rainstorm comes a rainbow. And the fact that he could be drafted by a team that loves to run the ball, a team that is going to allow him, and we're talking about Baltimore, a chance to develop and take a look at him at long range, given all that he had to go through, I think it turned out pretty well for him. You know what? He'll make his money down the road, but just sometimes it's who drafts you that can have a big say in your career. And I think that he's at the best possible place he could be given all the circumstances. Now, of the Trojans drafted that we just talked about, which one will have the longest and most successful NFL career, and why, Chris?
Well, I mean, the wild card with that always is who can stay healthy, right? So you would think that your wide receivers and your corners at least aren't taking the constant physical punishment. And so you'd think those guys would have the best chance of staying healthy for a while. I think Tuli could surprise. You know, he did not have he didn't have the numbers in terms of weight, 40 time, and the rest that the NFL is looking for in terms of big time edge rushers. But the thing is, he's an excellent football player with a great motor who has a lot of versatility. I mean, one of the nice things about playing for USC last year, if you're Thule, is that half the time you were the only guy in the defensive line that was doing anything. And so they would move you around in order to, so, I mean, he's playing 3 technique, 1 play, and then he's stand-up edge rusher on the next. That kind of versatility is going to help him, because it means that no matter what sort of system a team is running, Thule can probably slot in and play somewhere. Whereas usually, like if you're a defensive end, a classic defensive end in a 4-3 set, and you get a coaching change and now they run a 3-4, there's really no obvious place to put you because you're a tweener for both of those spots. Thule may be a tweener, but the good news is he can play everywhere. And so I think he's going to be around for a very long time. I don't know if he's going to make Pro Bowls, but it wouldn't surprise me if he stays healthy, if he's in the league 8 or 10 years. I think that's pretty likely.
All right, who's going to have the longest and most successful NFL career, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I like the Thule answer, mostly because he doesn't get hurt. And if he does get hurt, he's not going to tell anybody and he'll play through it anyway. So he's going to be on the field for as long as he wants to. And that effort that he plays with is going to endear himself to another coaching staff, already 2 at USC. And I think the Chargers are going to fall in love with him all over again when he gets on the field there. So going a different direction, I think Jordan Addison is going to be a guy who his talent is going to keep him on the field for a long time. The NFL now, it's tough to keep, when you talk about him joining Justin Jefferson, it feels like you always have to draft that guy's replacement, because that guy, eventually you're going to have to pay him and you're not going to be able to pay him enough money. So if he can play up to that potential, maybe he becomes that next guy for the Vikings and kind of takes over that role. And then you've got some longevity there until they draft somebody else. And now you've got to go find a different place to play. But I feel pretty confident in those top 2 guys really sticking and being impact guys. And look, not to take Mark's guy, but if he says Andrew Voorhees is a guy who just gets plugged in at right guard and plays for a decade, sure, why not?
Mark?
Erik took my guy. No, look, Andrew is just going to be like Erik said, you're going to plug him in. You know what you're going to get. You're just going to get a very consistent player you're not going to have to say, all right, I got to find somebody to replace him next year. He's just not going to get the job done. As I mentioned, Andrew could play 4 out of the 5 positions on the offensive line. He did it at USC. If he stays healthy and that knee recovers the way his doctor's letter said it's going to recover, he's going to have a really long career. Whether it's with Baltimore or a different team, that's besides the point. Andrew's going to stick around. He's just a hard-working guy, puts his head down, does his job. You're never going to hear a complaint about him. Not that the other guys are going to have any problems, but Andrew is just that type of guy.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that Voorhees is going to have the longest. I don't know if it's going to be the most successful. Could be over a length of time. I think that Voorhees has had his time in the surgical barrel, so to speak. And I think offensive linemen don't seem to get quite as well. They get physically challenged, of course, but I think he'll have a great run in the NFL. And I can't think of a better player that deserves it. So good luck to all of them, but it will be interesting to follow. Panel, the Trojans had a number of players that were not drafted but signed as free agents. Those free agents included running back Travis Dye with the New York Jets, the aforementioned Brandon Peely with Miami Dolphins, offensive lineman Bobby Haskins with Chicago Bears, and wide receiver Terrell Bynum with the Los Angeles Chargers. And someone that's kind of went under the radar with it, Josh Follow reportedly has been invited to the New York Jets mini camp, whatever that's going to mean. Of all the players signed, panel as free agents, who is the most likely to be on an NFL roster for the first 2023 regular season game? Chris, prediction?
Yeah, this one's easy for me. It's Travis Dye. Here's the thing. If you want to make a roster as a free agent guy, you have to have a lot of versatility, and you have to be somebody who the team is going to want to have in the locker room, right? Somebody of high character who's going to do the right things all the time. Travis Dye is not very big and he's not very fast, but Travis Dye is a football player, and you can. I think he's a guy who you can see getting a lot of time as a third down back. I wouldn't be surprised if 4 years and now we're talking about how Travis Dye is a Pro Bowler for special teams, right? He's a guy who you could stick out there who would bust his butt and become the best kickoff coverage guy in the league, right? You could see him doing that. So I think Travis Dye is going to play for a long time, and I can't think of another Trojan who played only 1 year for USC who I have fonder memories of than Travis Dye. Just a fantastic kid, a fantastic football player who squeezed out every single drop of production he could squeeze out from what was in many respects a pretty average level of talent. Just a great guy, and I think he's going to be around a long time.
Eric, you agree?
Yeah, and specifically when he went into the special team stuff, because I think Travis Dye is one of those guys. He gets football and he can help you in so many different ways. To go a different way, instead of just talking about Travis Dye again, Brandon Peely is an interesting one for me, just because those bodies, you need them. You need a bunch of those big bodies who can move a little bit, and I think maybe if you can play and stay healthy and are physically up to it, that interior defensive line spot is probably the easiest spot, because teams are looking for him all over the place. And so I think that is kind of a path that he could take to stick, especially because I know the Dolphins, they don't seem to be super excited about a lot of their interior defensive linemen. So that there may be a spot for him to land. But in terms of a guy showing up to a mini camp as an undrafted free agent and staking his claim to, I deserve to be one of your 53 guys, I'm not going to pick anybody over Travis Dye in terms of making an impression and a coach ultimately feeling like we're a better team if he's in our locker room than without him. So those two, I think, probably have potential to stick.
Mark, who's your call?
Yeah, those are the right answers. I mean, we would love to, to see the other three stick around and latch onto a team for the season. But, if they do, it's going to be on the practice squad. But as far as, Travis Dye and Brandon Peely, those are 53-man roster guys. So I mentioned Peely earlier. You don't typically see six-figure signing bonuses given out to undrafted free agents. So Eric just said it, Miami's not too keen on what they have on their roster. They might have found a cheap way of bolstering their roster. Whether he's going to be a starter, I doubt it. But of those guys who signed as undrafted, it's Travis and Brandon. Bobby, he had some injury issues in his 1 year at USC, and he had injury issues at Virginia. That stuff carries over to the NFL. And Josh Follow, look, you get to see him make one great play every year, and then that's all you see from him. So I just don't know if he's going to be able to break that cycle as a professional.
And I will agree. It's going to be Travis Dye. I am not quite as high on Brandon Peely as some of you. I wish him well. I hope he does stick, but I think that I feel more comfortable saying that Travis Dye will be on that NFL roster for all the mentioned reasons. All right, here's a poisonous question. There have obviously been many hundreds of USC players that have been drafted into the NFL. Panel, of all the USC draft picks, name a Trojan player that never lived up to their high draft status. All right, Chris, sock it to us.
I can think of a handful off those early Pete Carroll teams, but I'm going to go with Mike Williams, who was, I think he was picked number 10 overall, maybe 11. actually lost a year of eligibility because he tried to get to the NFL a year early. Mike Williams was as dominant a college football player as I've seen play at USC. I mean, I've said it before on this show. He was extraordinary. And you usually, and he would physically dominate games from wide receiver, which I don't think I've really seen much in football before. Just incredible. And I'm stunned that Mike Williams went to the NFL and did next to nothing. I'm stunned that he couldn't, work out and stop eating enough to do something, if we're going to be honest, because that was his problem. But Mike Williams was extraordinary, and there's no way in the world that guy should not have had a 10-year career where he's catching 1,000 yards of in receiving every year. So he's my pick.
All right, Erik, who is it?
Yeah, sure. It's I think Mike Williams, but I'm turning the car around because I feel like we've hit on a lot of negativity the past couple of things with USC players that haven't panned out. So I'm going the other way. Players that have outplayed their draft stock, and recently I think Talanoa and Amon-Ra are absolute picks for that. But going way back, Dennis Thurman was an 11th rounder. He ended up with 36 career interceptions, 4 interception returns for touchdowns. And to bring it current, he has hooked up with Deion Sanders and is coaching with him now. So he's at Colorado as a director of quality control on the defense there. So got into coaching. He was the defensive coordinator at Jackson State with Coach Prime there too. So going to see him a little bit around the Pac-12. But always positivity from me. The three of you can go negative and pick more guys that didn't pan out.
So we're just answering whatever question we want now. Is that what this show has turned into?
I would just
it is
out there.
That's fine. If that's what we're doing, that's fine. I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to turn it right. You have to go in that direction a little bit, and then you can grab the wheel as you're talking and go wherever you want. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, boy, Erik, what a kissy. I have to say that thank God Marc follows you, because I know Marc will have an answer to this one. So, Mr. Negativity, who do you have?
I like Tommy's versus In and Out and so.
You're going to McKinney route. Stop it now.
I'll be honest. I'm with these guys. These types of questions. If you get drafted, you've crossed that threshold. You've gotten through the door. What happens when you get to the NFL? There are so many things. There's injuries. Do we take that into consideration? I'm sorry, Greg. If you want to call out players who sucked,
I didn't say they sucked. Did I say sucked? Was sucked in the question?
Hey, Greg, I don't have a problem being negative. The two of us just go back and forth and be negative for the rest of the show. It's fine.
Well, you're very manly, Chris, and I think it shows.
Who didn't live up to expectations? Split the hair. You're saying who didn't do what they should have done when they got to the NFL?
I didn't say they should have done. They didn't. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to.
You're saying they were a bust
on their personality or their
calling them a bust. You're calling them a bust. I don't want to do that.
I didn't. Did I say the word bust, Marc?
Didn't use the word bust.
No, I did not use the word
Williams was a bust. I'll say it.
I mean, any first round pick, right? Matt Leinart is in there too, right? The guys that go in the first round and don't end up multi-year Pro Bowlers and in the discussion for Hall of Fame if you go in the top 10.
Reggie Bush.
Yes.
Reggie Bush played a long time and he had some decent years, but Reggie Bush didn't come close to being the type of NFL player that people expected him to be. I mean, he was a generational talent as a college football player. He went number 2, and that was a shock that he didn't go number 1. Marc, you don't get to talk on this. You've decided you don't want to participate.
But you're using my context. You're not saying Reggie Bush got hurt in the NFL. Was he used the right way? Those are types of things that you look at. I would say Reggie Bush had a really good career in the NFL. Was it his Heisman year at USC? Of course not.
It's not what you expect when you draft a number 2 overall.
I wouldn't have.
I've been told that Reggie Bush accounted for 0 yards in his Heisman career when we look at the stat sheet. So not super impressive.
Talk about a bust. He was a big time guy in 2004, 2005. He gets 0 yards, 0 touchdowns.
Incredible.
Terrible.
There you go, Greg. You got everything you wanted out of this question. You got everybody yelling at each other.
No, Greg's going to tell us the answer now.
I'm going to give my answer.
Okay, Greg.
First, let me preface it, though, by saying this. I thought had USC beaten Texas, Matt Leinart would have been considered perhaps the greatest college football player ever, if not quarterback ever. He certainly deserved that title, in my opinion, but his transition to the NFL, I don't think he lived up to his draft choice. He didn't spend all that long in the NFL. His identity will always be USC, which it should be. He's one of the great legends of all time. I just don't think that he lived up to the status that, that he had in the college football. And that doesn't take away from what he did in college. I don't get too wrapped up, honestly, with players that transition. There's very few players that can really have that. O.J. Simpson was able to do it. Marcus Allen was able to do it. A number of players have been able to. Ron Yeri was able to do it. But, a lot of times the pro game just doesn't match for whatever reason where a player is drafted. So it's Matt Leinart for me. So with that, let's have love, peace, and happiness by turning to the viewer questions and panel answers. It's overtime. We've got just about 4 questions here that we'll let you guys all chop around with. This is from Ephraim in Bell Gardens, California. Does a player that places his name in the transfer portal have to pick and sign with the school inside of the portal transfer dates, or can he still sign with the school after a portal window closes? Are there any potential players in the current portal window the Trojans could still sign? I think that this is kind of a really good question because I think a lot of people are confused that they think because the portal window ends, a player can't sign. So somebody want to give the definitive answer other than me on this?
So you have to have your name in by April 30th inside the portal, but you can show up and enroll at school whenever you want. I mean,
yeah, the portal players won't sign the way high school players will. So they'll just enroll at the school, right? Caleb Williams pretty famously enrolled like the last day that USC students could enroll in classes for that spring semester for him to be eligible to play that spring. So most of these guys, I think, will want to be there by that kind of summer school program. And so they could just, if they want to, show up that day, enroll in school. I mean, obviously the coaches would have to have a heads up that they're coming, but so no, there's no set day now on, I mean, there's still, Trequan Fagans is a guy from coming out of Alabama that USC is still talking to about official visits. And there's guys in the portal that they'll take a little bit, still taking official visits, still trying to figure it out. But like Marc said, that April 30th date, and technically that's the date that they have to tell their own school, I want to be put in the portal. The school then has 48 hours, which is why some guys could still show up, the Monday or Tuesday after that deadline as they go in. I do think, and I don't mean to add more questions to this, I think they've locked down those grad transfers to where they had this same date, this same kind of May 1st, April 30th date. It used to be like previously they could go in just whenever they wanted before the portal started. Like they could go in before that April 15th date to be able to make their decision. But no, at this point, I think we should know all the names that are in the portal. Where they end up landing could go all the way into fall if they wanted to take it all the way then.
All right, question 2 from Rory in Point Loma, California. Where do most recruiting analysts get their information from?
From me, I have a newsletter.
Did it just come out? Is this a new business venture for you?
It wasn't open to the public. It is now, but it'll cost you $100 a month. But if you want to send me $100 by Zelle every month, I'll send you an email about the recruits you want to pay attention to.
It's called Arledge on Negative Recruiting.
Yeah, there you go.
There's no negativity there because Marc said he wouldn't read it if I got negative.
That's true. But let's get to Erik. You did this for ESPN. They thought the world of you. You're the West Coast representative. you were considered a recruiting analyst. You still are. Where do you get most of your information from?
You get it from the players, you get it from the recruits, you get it from their family members, you get it from their teammates, their coaches, you get it from kind of whoever you can talk about, high school coaches, 7-on-7 coaches. It seems like you get more information about other people instead of going like to that kid and asking him about his process. If you go to somebody else, you can get a lot more information about their process. But college coaches will always discuss, clearly off the record, about kind of what's going on and that kind of stuff. So from anywhere, you get it from kid's neighbor, or some guy. A lot of it is some guy works with some recruit's dad or knows the sister or whatever, and the aunt has no idea that this official visit is some kind of secret, and she's telling everybody at work about it, and it just kind of gets out. So no, there's no one place, unless you do subscribe to Chris's newsletter, which he really boils it down into one spot, and you can just get everything there.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to, Erik, since you're the editor-in-chief of USC, WeAreSC.com.
I don't publish.
Is there any possibility
Chris's newsletter?
Is there any possibility that Chris's newsletter could be an adjunct to a subscriber at WeAreSC.com?
No. It's far too highbrow for anything that we would publish on our site.
Yeah, if you read or listen to WeAreSC content, you probably wouldn't understand it. I use lots of big words, so no, sorry.
It's true.
I just offended all of our viewership and all of my readers, and you know what? That's what they come here for.
Of course, no doubt about it. High entertainment here. I would just like to add to the analyst thing. When I was more heavily involved in it, I thought the starting point for me was to see the player at a camp, whether it was a Nike camp or whether it was a Under Armour camp. That's where I wanted to see for myself what this player was like. Not that I distrusted other analysts, but what Erik said was absolutely true. You get the under the rug stuff from seeking out stuff. But I started off always to get my information from some of these camps and participation areas. All right, let's move on. We got just a couple of questions left, and we're going to wrap it up. From Tomas in Moreno Valley, California. For what seems like generations, the recruiting scene has been dominated by the LA area, but now it's the Inland Empire part of Southern California. How did the Inland Empire become such a hotbed of high school recruiting? Let me just start off first with Erik, and then I think, Chris, you probably have an idea because you're kind of like on the borderline there, right? So, Erik, what turned the Inland Empire into this motherlode of gold nuggets?
They've always had guys. It's totally cyclical, I think, where you see guys play, and honestly, a lot of those guys, the Inland Empire, I think, has probably not been seen recently because a lot of those kids came out to Orange County, to modern day, to schools like that to come play. So those guys that are leaving from those high schools closer to Los Angeles, in Orange County, those have been Inland Empire guys. And so I think it's where you play football. There's a lot of kids that are playing football out there, and they've done a good job with some of those programs. But you don't see, the last couple of years, like Corona Centennial hasn't been, pumping out recruits going back to like, Drake Jackson and Gary Bryant when it was boom, a few years in a row. But I don't know that I'd say, the Inland Empire all of a sudden now, is producing all these big time guys. It feels like it's kind of been how it always is. You get guys all over California. The change for me that's disappointing has been Bosco and Modern Day, just everybody coming there to those two schools. I loved it when guys, you go to your local high school, you still see that occasionally. And I understand what it is. You see those weight rooms, you see the championships, the kinds of games they're playing when they're going and playing across the country, some of these big time schools, huge atmospheres. So I understand it. But I think because there's so many transfers and so many guys moving around, you get a little skewed perception on where these kids are actually from, where they grew up.
Yeah, I'll chip in on this. For many years, of course, Concord de La Salle was the not only big power in Northern California, but nationally. And I had friends up there, and they say, you can't believe where some of these players are coming from to go to Concord de La Salle. It's not like a little area. And I think you hit on a great point. If you really take a look at the modern day rosters of St. John Bosco, and if you're familiar with the Southern California area, it really is jaw dropping to find out how these players from really great distances away, there was, players coming from Palos Verdes, the area of which Lincoln Riley lives in that particular area, going to modern day. And I can't say, I say to myself, how in the world could you get up early in the morning to cross across Southern California to be in a classroom at 8 o'clock in the morning? I don't know how you do that day in and day out. It's even players from the Inland Empire coming into modern day. I mean, this is not a put down on modern day. It's not a put down in St. John, but just the transportation issues, how you could keep that pace up. We know how long football practice is and how long, you have Saturdays and so on and so forth. But to really see where modern day and St. John have players coming from, they're super powers, well-deserved, but it is really amazing where they all come from. You just don't really hear about it. If you're watching a college football game, they'll always tell you where a player's from. He's from Denver, Colorado. He's from, Athens, Georgia. But you don't see that at the high school level. But it's amazing. Eric, I have one question, and we're going to finish it up. You are from the San Diego area. Is there anything comparable to modern day or St. John when it comes to taking players from all over San Diego and getting them into one high school?
No, I mean, not to that level. No, nobody in San Diego is playing high school football at the level of those two. Cathedral Catholic for a few years felt like they were kind of gathering a lot of players, and a lot of times it's, a school like that. Nothing comes to mind right now. There's always going to be that, right? You're always going to get a group of kids that kind of want to play together, and there's always guys transferring all over the place. But in terms of just everybody landing at two schools, nothing jumps off the page right now.
Greg, my move from Ocean View High School in Huntington Beach to Elsinore High School in 1989 was sort of the start of Inland Valley, the Inland Valley dominance, and that was really high school's first super team. And I think that goes unrecognized. But we were modern day in Bosco before there was modern day in Bosco.
You can read about it in the archives of the Arledge newsletter. It's one of the first articles.
I was a 5-star in the first edition of that.
The original question, there's actually an underlying point. Why was the Inland Empire starting to grow over LA, Orange County? Economics. People are moving because they can't afford to live in LA County or in Orange County. And you were starting to see that migration out there. So I know I'm kind of taking this into a different rabbit hole, but that plays a part. And all of a sudden, Eric, you brought up the modern day and the St. John Bosco. Here's a perfect example. You have DeAndre Carter. He travels from Temecula every day back and forth to modern day. That's a player that, for all intents and purposes, should be playing at Lake Elsinore or in Temecula, one of those programs. He's schlepping an hour and a half each way, back and forth every day.
This is also why you're seeing the South has always been great for college football recruiting, but you're starting to see more recruits from Arizona, more from Nevada. You're seeing more from Texas. Texas always had a lot, but these are areas of high growth. You have lots of young families moving to these places, and that means you're going to have a lot more high school football players coming out of those places.
Yeah, you take a look at Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas.
Wow.
It'd be a superpower. Well, this kind of transitions to our last question, which I think probably is appropriate, from Steve-O, USC. He says, and I have heard this, but I have no direct knowledge of it, but what is it about St. John Bosco and USC? It seems like it is almost impossible to successfully recruit from them, while Mater Dei loves USC. Is there any truth to the rumor? I mean, SC has had players. They have players on the current roster from St. John Bosco. Jude Wolf for one. I think Colombo, the walk-on running back, and Raylan Goforth was another. But it seems like a lot of the really high-profile players have not in the past gone to USC. Is that a legitimate or just pure fantasy? What's going on there?
No, it's legitimate. They're USC and St. John Bosco. It's not a tenuous relationship, but there are people, who think they have the student athlete's best interest at heart. Sometimes they have their own interest at heart. And I guess that's the best way to tap dance around that subject.
Well, how about this? Greg, let's imagine you're a high school football coach and you actually care about your players and you think they have a chance they have the talent to be an All-American and an NFL draft choice. Do you send them to play for Clay Helton?
But it's still happening with Lincoln Riley. It's still happening with Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, but when Lincoln Riley shows that his teams can play defense, I think Bosco players who play defense would be more willing to play at USC. I mean, I put the fault on USC because the reality is that a lot of those Bosco kids were going to Ohio State and places like that where they were actually going to have a real coaching staff instead of Clay Helton. And when USC stops giving up 41 points a game to any halfway decent offense, that will help too. I think they'll stop this year. But if they don't stop this year, it's hard to blame local kids from saying, you know what? I think I'll go play defense at Alabama. I mean, what are you going to do? USC has to coach better. I think they have the staff in place. This is not my criticism of Lincoln Riley. I'm just saying, when Clay Helton's a coach, you probably should steer your players somewhere else.
But why that one specific high school? That's the issue.
Well,
we talk all the time about USC or the last few years missing on California kids. They're not all Bosco kids. And look, I don't have the answer to this question, but who's the last Bosco player to get drafted into the NFL out of USC? I mean, it's not like USC has missed on every Bosco guy. You mentioned Jude Wolf, and obviously he hasn't had a chance to get drafted yet, but Chris Steele, that's a guy that Bosco coaches can kind of point to. Raylan Goforth didn't really turn into, a big time player at USC. So they've had some guys come from Bosco to USC. And if that's the point, those guys haven't developed to where they become elite players, then I can understand, hey, let's not go there. Let's go to these other places. Now, you look around the country at what Bosco players have turned into. Wyatt Davis was a big time guy, and he ended up, I think, a third round pick, which again, I'm not going to knock becoming a third round pick at all. Trent McDuffie is kind of the one name that jumps out as turning into a first round guy, and he was at Washington, but it sure feels like Bosco has produced. I mean, DJ went all the way over to Clemson, and it didn't really work out for him not going to USC. I think Bo Collins has done a little bit out there at Clemson, but not in that kind of Jordan Addison, whatever conversation. So,
don't forget about Josh Rosen. Don't forget about Josh Rosen's fantastic career.
Right. So there's something, there's something to that, right? Like are the players coming out? Because at this point, I talked about a little bit how it's disappointing, I think, a bit to see these teams kind of gang up with each other, the Mater Dei and the Bosco. At this point, I really think there is something to film where you're the guy on defense, right? You have to play linebacker, and oh, by the way, you have to play 6 other spots too, because you're playing with a bunch of guys who are 5'2" and getting run over. and you're the guy, right? I think there's something to seeing that kind of film of a guy that needs to do that, and offensively too, right? Can you be the guy when everyone knows the ball's going there? I think being part of a defense where you've got 11 big time D1 players as starters, yeah, it's fun. And yeah, you're going to win a ton of games, but is that kind of the best for development? And what does that look like when you go to the next level? So there's always stuff to weigh, right? Bosco Mater Dei are going to produce. Bryce Young just went number one. He had an okay college career, I think, coming out of Mater Dei, playing with some loaded teams. So you're going to find hits, you're going to find misses. But I think when you look at that kind of Bosco to USC, the guys who have gone, I can understand kind of what Chris is saying, where it's, do you want to send them there? Is that the best case scenario the last 5, 6, 7 years for them to go there? If they're not becoming, the best players that you think they can be. I also, what Mark had said, I think there's a lot of that across the country where coaches are, how does this affect me? How does this shine back on me, rather than, is this the best spot for this kid? Even if he doesn't become a big time football player, is that still maybe the best spot for him? And again, they're weighing all of that stuff too. So it's just not going to be a simple answer. Chris is right. If USC goes to the playoffs, the defense is really good, and USC wins 12, 13 games this year, you're going to find it a whole lot easier to recruit from any school, Bosco especially, I think.
All right. On that positive note, a reminder, if you have a question or comments for our panel, go to either the WeAreSC message boards, click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, viewer or listener questions. So great show, guys. That'll do it for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. Hope you all enjoyed it. So until next Tuesday, a big thank you again to panelists Marc Kulkin, Erik McKinney, and Chris Arledge, and a special thank you to all of you loyal listeners. We appreciate both your viewership and your comments. We try to keep it all constructive here, and we do really appreciate you watching. So have yourself a great week. Until then, this is your moderator, Greg Katz, reminding you all to fight on, everybody.